The glass of Hennessy sat untouched on the bar. Frank Lucas hadn't lifted it in 20 minutes, but his fingers rested on the base, turning it slowly, clockwise, then counterclockwise, a tell most men wouldn't notice. But Reggie Williams noticed everything. 42 years tending bar in Harlem and the Bronx. 42 years reading the room before the room even knew what it was feeling. And tonight, Reggie could feel it. The air in Frank's place was wrong. Too quiet for a Friday. Too empty for 9 p.m. Then the door opened. 3 men walked in. White boys. Out-of-towners. The kind that moved like they'd practiced in a mirror. Leather jackets, despite the September heat. Hands in pockets. Eyes that swept the room once, twice, then locked on the man sitting alone at the bar, Frank Lucas. The first man, tall, blonde, scar through his left eyebrow, moved to the pool table, blocking the back exit. The second, shorter, stockier, gold chain catching the neon light, positioned himself by the jukebox, covering the side door. The third man, the leader, walked straight to the bar, sat 2 stools down from Frank, nodded to Reggie. Beer, whatever's cold. His hand never left his jacket pocket. Reggie's eyes met Frank's in the mirror behind the liquor shelf. Frank's expression didn't change. He just took that first sip of Hennessy. Slow, deliberate. The blonde near the pool table shifted his weight. His jacket opened just enough. Reggie saw the pistol grip. 3 guns. 1 target. No way out. And then Frank spoke. 4 words. Calm as a Sunday sermon. Reggie, lock the door. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become the reason Frank Lucas's name still makes old-school hustlers go silent when it's spoken. 3 trained killers walked into that bar with one job. But when the smoke cleared, when the sirens stopped, only one man was left standing, and he owned the bar. Before we get into what went down that night, do me a favor, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me if you've heard whispers about Frank Lucas before tonight. And subscribe, because the stories we're bringing you, they don't teach this in school. This is the real history of the kind that lives in barbershops and corner stores, the kind that shaped a generation. Now let's get back to September 8th, 1975, and understand why 3 professional killers thought they could walk into Frank Lucas's bar and walk out alive. By the fall of 1975, Frank Lucas had become something the Italian mob thought impossible. A black man from North Carolina who'd built an empire that made the 5 families nervous. Not just rich, not just connected, untouchable. His operation wasn't flashy, wasn't loud. That was the genius. While other dealers were cutting heroin 5, 6, 7 times, diluting it until customers were chasing a high that barely came, Frank had a different philosophy. Pure product, fair price, consistent quality. He called it blue magic. A heroin so pure, it was packaged in blue tape to distinguish it from every other bag on the street. 98% pure. In an era when most street dope was 30% if you were lucky. By 1975, blue magic was moving through Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and parts of New Jersey at a rate that made old-school mobsters physically sick. Conservative estimates put Frank's operation at $1 million a day. That's $1 million every single day. But money was just the surface. What made Frank Lucas truly dangerous, what kept him alive when smarter men had died, was his understanding of respect and fear. He didn't rule through terror. He ruled through reputation. Frank paid for funerals when families couldn't afford them. He made sure kids in his neighborhood had winter coats. When the city tried to shut down black-owned businesses on 116th Street, Frank made phone calls. The harassment stopped, but cross him, steal from him, disrespect him. There were stories, whispered stories, about men who skimmed, about dealers who tried to cut blue magic and pass it off as pure, about rivals who thought Frank's quiet demeanor meant weakness. Those men disappeared. Not dramatically, just gone. And Frank never spoke about it, never had to. The streets did the talking for him. By 75, the Italian families had watched Frank's empire grow for nearly 8 years. 8 years of watching a black man operate on a level they thought was reserved for them. The Lucchese family controlled the Bronx. The Genovese ran Manhattan below 96th. The Gambinos owned the docks. But Harlem belonged to Frank Lucas. And that was a problem. The meeting happened in a social club in Little Italy. August 12, 1975. Anthony, Tony Ducks Corallo, acting boss of the Lucchese family, sat at the head of the table. Around him, representatives from the other family. This wasn't about one crew's territory, and this was about principle. This man, Tony Ducks said, laying a photograph on the table, is moving more product than all 5 families combined. The photo showed Frank Lucas leaving a church on 135th Street, well-dressed, confident, alone. He's got no muscle around him, one capo observed, no bodyguards. He walks around like he's untouchable. Because he is, Tony Ducks replied. He's got every cop in Harlem on his payroll, every politician, every judge. You can't get close to him through the system. So we go around it. That's when Vincent, the Chin Gigante, leaned forward. Chin didn't talk much in meetings. When he did, people listened. We hire outsiders, nobody from New York, nobody he can trace back to us. Where? Tony Ducks asked. Detroit. I know 3 brothers, professionals. They've done work in Chicago, Cleveland. They're ghosts. The room was silent. What's the price? Tony Ducks finally asked. $50,000, plus expenses, half up front. Tony Ducks looked around the table. Every boss nodded. Make the call. Raymond, Marcus, and Kevin Shaw, ages 34, 31, and 28. They'd grown up on Detroit's east side during the '67 riots, learned violence young, perfected it as adults. Raymond was the strategist. Marcus was the enforcer. Kevin was the closer, the one who pulled the trigger when the moment came. They'd done 11 contracts between them, politicians, union bosses, rival dealers, clean jobs, no witnesses, no trails. On August 18th, they met Vincent Gigante in a parking garage in Newark. The target is Ellsworth Raymond Johnson Jr., Gigante said, handing Raymond a manila folder. Street name, Frank Lucas. Raymond opened the folder. Photos, addresses, daily routines. What's his security like? Raymond asked. That's the thing. He doesn't have any. He moves around Harlem like he's invisible, like nobody would dare touch him. Why not? Marcus asked. Gigante's jaw tightened. Because so far, nobody has. There's always a first time, Kevin said quietly. Gigante slid an envelope across the hood of the car. $25,000. You get the rest when I see his obituary in the Daily News. How long do we have? Raymond. 2 weeks. After that, the price drops. Raymond pocketed the envelope. He'll be dead in 10 days. But what the Shaw brothers didn't know, what Vincent Gigante didn't know, was that Frank Lucas had a network that would make the CIA jealous. And by the time the Shaw brothers landed at LaGuardia Airport on August 19th, Frank already knew they were coming. Frank Lucas didn't survive 8 years at the top of Harlem's drug trade through luck. He survived through information. While other dealers spent money on flashy cars and jewelry, Frank invested in not soldiers, not muscle, information brokers. The taxi dispatcher at LaGuardia, who radioed which cabs picked up out-of-town white boys asking about Harlem hotels. The hotel clerk on 145th, who noted when guests paid cash and asked too many questions about the neighborhood. The newspaper vendor on the corner, who watched the same 3 men photograph Frank's bar from across the street for 2 days straight. By August 21st, 3 days after the Shaw brothers arrived, Frank had their hotel room number, their rental car's license plate, and photographs of all 3 faces. He sat in his office above the bar, spreading the photos across his desk. His lieutenant, a man named Tango, stood by the door. I can have them gone by tonight, Tango said. Frank shook his head slowly. That solves nothing. Gigante sends 3. We kill 3. He sends 6 next time, then 12. So what do we do? Frank stared at the photos. We let them come. Tango's eyes widened. Boss! We let them come, Frank repeated. But we control when. We control where. We control how it ends. And how does it end? Frank looked up. His eyes were cold, final. With a message so loud, Vincent Gigante hears it in his sleep. For the next week, Frank maintained his routine. Morning coffee at the same diner. Afternoon rounds collecting from his distributors. Evenings at his bar on 142nd Street. The Shaw brothers watched. Photographed. Planned. By September 5th, they'd identified their moment. The bar, Raymond said, pointing to a surveillance photo. Friday nights, he's there alone. Just him and the bartender. No security, no crowd. Why Friday? Marcus asked. Because, Raymond explained, Friday's when he counts the week's take. He's distracted, predictable. Weapons? Kevin asked. 345s, suppressors. We walk in, do the job, walk out. 60 seconds max. The bartender? Marcus pressed. Raymond shrugged. Collateral. Can't leave witnesses. What they didn't know was that every conversation they'd had in their hotel room had been heard. Frank had paid the hotel maintenance man $500 to install a listening device in their room's smoke detector. He'd heard every word. On September 7th, the night before the planned hit, Frank called Reggie Williams into his office. Reggie had been tending Frank's bar for 6 years, former Marine, 2 tours in Vietnam. Steady hands, steadier nerves. There's going to be trouble tomorrow night, Frank said quietly. Reggie nodded. He'd suspected as much. The energy in the bar had been off all week. 3 men, Detroit. They're coming for me. Police? Reggie asked. Italian money. Lucchese family. Reggie was silent for a moment. What do you need from me? Frank looked at him directly. When I tell you to lock the door, you lock it. When I tell you to hit the floor, you hit the floor. No questions, no hesitation. And after, Reggie asked. Frank's expression didn't change. After? You pour me another drink, like nothing happened. Reggie held his gaze. Yes, sir. That night, Frank made his final preparations. Beneath the bar, taped to the underside, where Reggie kept the clean towels, Frank secured a loaded .38 special. In the storage room behind the bar, he positioned one of his most trusted men, an enforcer named Bricks, with a 12-gauge shotgun. Across the street, in the apartment above the bodega, 2 more of Frank's people watched with rifle. The trap was set. Frank Lucas wasn't walking into an ambush. He was creating one. Friday came. Frank arrived at the bar at 7 p.m. Same as always. He sat at his usual spot. Second stool from the end. Reggie poured him Hennessy without asking. By 8:30 the bar was empty, except for them. Frank had made sure of it. He'd put the word out that the bar was closed for private business. Regular customers stayed away. At 8:47 p.m., Frank's lookout called from across the street. 3 white boys, heading your way. Frank took a slow sip of his drink, set it down gently. Reggie, he said quietly, it's time. Reggie nodded, moved casually toward the storage room where Bricks waited. At 8:51 p.m., the door opened. Raymond Shaw walked in first, scanned the room, saw Frank sitting alone at the bar, back to the door. Perfect. Marcus entered next, moved immediately to the pool table, blocking the back exit. Kevin followed, positioned himself by the jukebox, covering the side door. Raymond walked to the bar, sat 2 stools away from Frank. Beer, he said to Reggie, who'd emerged from the back. Whatever's cold. His hand never left his jacket. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the neon Budweiser sign in the window. Then Raymond spoke. Frank Lucas. Frank didn't turn, didn't look up. Just took another sip of his Hennessy. Depends who's asking. Raymond smiled. Cold. Professional. Someone who's been paid a lot of money to make sure you don't see tomorrow. Frank set his glass down, turned slowly on his stool. He looked at Raymond, then at Marcus by the pool table, then at Kevin by the jukebox. Detroit, Frank said. Not a question, a statement. Raymond's smile faltered slightly. How? Raymond, Marcus, Kevin Shaw, Frank continued. The Shoreham Hotel, room 412. You've been here 9 days. You took 247 surveillance photos. You talked about killing me 16 times. The color drained from Raymond's face. You even discussed whether to kill Reggie here, Frank continued, his voice eerily calm. You decided yes. Can't leave witnesses, you said. Kevin's hand moved toward his jacket. I wouldn't, Frank said, still not raising his voice. You're outnumbered 3-1, Raymond said, trying to regain control. Whatever you think you know, it doesn't matter. You're a dead man. Frank almost smiled. Reggie, lock the door. Reggie walked calmly to the front door, turned the deadbolt. The sound echoed in the silent bar. Raymond stood up quickly, hand diving into his jacket. I wouldn't finish that motion, a voice said from behind them. The Shaw brothers turned. Bricks emerged from the storage room, 12-gauge pointed at Marcus. The look on Marcus's face said everything. They'd missed him entirely. Now, Frank said, standing slowly, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your hands out of your jackets. Slowly. You're going to place your weapons on the bar. And then we're going to have a conversation. And if we don't, Raymond asked, voice shaking. Frank tilted his head slightly. The front window shattered inward, not from gunfire, but from the rifle barrel that poked through from the apartment across the street. Red laser dot dancing on Raymond's chest. Kevin looked to the side door. Another red dot appeared on his forehead from a second-story window. They were surrounded, completely. 3 guns, Frank said quietly. Against 7. You do the math. Raymond's hand trembled as he slowly pulled the .45 from his jacket, set it on the bar. Marcus followed, then Kevin. 3 guns, lined up on the wooden bar top. Frank walked over, picked up Raymond's weapon, checked the chamber, suppressor attached. Professional work, he said, almost admiringly. Vincent Gigante sent quality. I respect that. He set the gun back down, looked at Raymond. You want to know why I let you come? Why I didn't kill you at the end? Why I let you spend 9 days planning my murder? Raymond couldn't speak. His brother Marcus, standing by the pool table with Brix's shotgun still aimed at his spine, managed to whisper, "Why?" Frank picked up his Hennessy, took a slow sip. Because killing you quietly solves nothing. Gigante sends 3 more next month, then 3 more, then 6. It never ends. But this? He gestured around the bar. This sends a different message. I let you come. I knew your names, your room number, your plan. I let you walk into my bar. I let you pull your guns. And then I showed you that you never had a chance. Not for 1 second. He leaned closer to Raymond, close enough that Raymond could smell the Hennessy on his breath. You're going to walk out of here tonight, all 3 of you. You're going to get on a plane back to Detroit. And you're going to tell Vincent Gigante exactly what happened. You're going to tell him I knew, that I let you come, that I could have killed you 100 different ways, but I chose to let you leave. Do you understand why? Raymond shook his head weakly. Because, Frank said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, the next men he sends won't be so lucky. The next time someone walks into my bar with murder in their pocket, they don't walk out. They get carried out. And I want Gigante to know that he had his chance. He had 3 professionals. He had surprise. He had weapons. And he still couldn't touch me. Frank stepped back, picked up the 3 .45s from the bar, handed them to Brix. Now get out. Don't run. Walking shows respect. Running shows guilt. And the only thing keeping you alive right now is the message you're carrying. The Shaw brothers didn't need to be told twice. Raymond moved first, then Marcus, then Kevin. They walked toward the door. Reggie unlocked it. Before Raymond stepped out onto 122nd Street, Frank called out one last time. Raymond. Raymond turned. Frank was back on his stool, Hennessy in hand, like nothing had happened. You tell Gigante something else. Tell him Harlem doesn't bleed for outsiders. It never has. It never will. The Shaw brothers left. The door closed behind them. Reggie locked it again, poured Frank another drink. Brix emerged from the shadows, shotgun lowered. You think they'll deliver the message? Brix asked. Frank swirled his Hennessy. Watch the amber liquid catch the neon light. They'll deliver it. The question is whether Gigante will listen. 3 days later, Raymond Shaw called Vincent Gigante from a payphone in Detroit. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Gigante listened in silence. When Raymond finished, there was a long pause. Then Gigante spoke. You're telling me he knew? From the beginning, Raymond replied. Hotel room, surveillance, everything. Another pause. And he let you walk? He wanted us to deliver a message, Raymond said quietly. What message? That you had your chance, and that the next crew won't be as lucky. Gigante was silent for nearly a full minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. We're done with Harlem. The Lucchese family called an emergency meeting the following week. Word had already spread through the underworld. 3 Detroit professionals walked into Frank Lucas's bar. Frank knew they were coming. He let them come. He showed them they were surrounded, and he let them leave to tell the story. By September 20th, every major crime family in New York had heard the tale. Frank Lucas had become more than untouchable. He'd become something the mob couldn't comprehend. A man who turned ambushes into lessons. A man who let his enemies live so they could spread fear more effectively than their deaths ever could. The Italian families made a collective decision. Harlem was off limits. Frank Lucas was off limits. There was money everywhere else in the city. No point dying for pride. As for the Shaw brothers, they never took another contract. Raymond opened a garage in Detroit. Marcus became a long-haul trucker. Kevin worked construction. When anyone asked about New York, they changed the subject. There were rumors, though, whispered stories in Detroit's underworld, about the night 3 professionals walked into Frank Lucas's bar and how Frank had known their names before they even introduced themselves, about how he'd let them plan his murder for 9 days just to prove he could stop it whenever he wanted, about how he'd given them their guns back and sent them home with a message. Reggie Williams tended bar at Frank's place until Frank's arrest in 1975. After Frank went to prison, Reggie retired, moved to North Carolina, lived quietly. But every year on September 8th, he'd pour himself a Hennessy, raise the glass to no one in particular, and whisper, "To the ones who walked out." Frank Lucas served 7 years in federal prison. When he was released, he was a different man, quieter, focused on family. But old-timers in Harlem still tell the story about the night 3 killers walked into Frank's bar, about how Frank knew they were coming before they even bought their plane tickets, about how he controlled every second of their plan, about how he let them leave because a living witness is more terrifying than a dead enemy. The story isn't just about violence, it's about something deeper. Frank Lucas understood what most men never learn. True power isn't about what you do to your enemies, it's about what your enemies believe you can do. It's about being 3 steps ahead. It's about turning their trap into your stage. 3 killers walked into that bar thinking they had every advantage. Numbers, weapons, surprise. But Frank Lucas had something they couldn't see coming. Information, patience, and the understanding that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a bullet. It's letting your enemy survive to tell the story. If this story got you thinking, hit that like button. We're bringing you these Frank Lucas stories every week, and trust me, they only get deeper. Drop a comment if you understand why Frank let them walk, and let me know, would you have shown mercy or sent a different message? Next time, we're telling the story of how Frank Lucas walked into a room full of Italian mobsters completely unarmed and walked out with control of the entire heroin trade in Harlem. You don't want to miss that. Remember, in Harlem, respect isn't given, it's earned. 1 decision at a time. 3 killers walked in, only the owner walked out, and everyone remembers why.